Before we begin this podcast, please be advised that the following episode contains language that some listeners may find offensive and inappropriate. The opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast producers. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the second installment of Kenny Gilbert's story. Last time, we heard about Kenny Gilbert's downfall from top student to high school dropout. Now we hear how Kenny conspired to commit murder, along with his childhood best friend Charles, on this episode of Voices of a Killer.
So the victim in your case, when did you meet him?
He was the brother of a friend of ours that we had actually worked for at McDonald's. Our manager at McDonald's, she was 35 and she had a couple of kids, and we would go over to her house and party because she partied. He found out that she smoked weed, and they started hanging out together a little bit. And we started using her house as a crash pad.
Is that where you did coke for the first time?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And was the victim living with her, or that's just a brother?
First, he showed up out of the blue. He was like 20 minutes outside of town. He hadn't seen his sister since he was a kid, and called her up and said that he needed a place to stay.
Oh, wow.
So he moved in with her. He had been a contractor for the Army at Fort Hood in Killeen, and showed up with his Doberman and his computers.
Yeah. So the victim, Kevin, is basically now living at his sister's. And are y'all just hanging out there, or are you actually living with this sister?
No, I never lived there. We would just go over there and drink and get high. Sometimes we would watch the kids for her while she worked or whatever.
How did Kevin feel about y'all getting high?
I don't think he particularly cared for us being around his niece and nephew in that condition, and understandably so. There were times where we were supposed to be watching them, and we were doing a horrible job of it.
Sure.
We took Kelly to a party one night and then forgot where she was and couldn't go pick her up. We dropped the kids off at Worlds of Fun, and we're supposed to be there watching them, but we drove all the way back to the city to go get high.
Wow.
So, that's the type of thing he was trying to prevent by saying, hey, we shouldn't be around the kids.
Right. So, how did y'all feel about him? Did he kind of feel like an outsider because he didn't get high?
Yeah, he was a square. He was an outsider, but he was a nice enough guy. He would drink beer and stuff. I even sat down and drank a beer with him the week before this stuff happened. He was a decent person.
Yeah.
He was a kind of a thorn in our side because we're trying to
right.
Play. But that didn't have anything to do with what eventually happened. This didn't happen because we were upset with him or didn't like him or anything like that.
As Kenny tells it, he and Charles had no real animosity toward their victim, Kevin. If anything, Kevin disapproved of the boys because they were irresponsible babysitters toward his niece and nephew. But overall, Kenny remembers Kevin as a decent guy, someone he even shared a beer with shortly before this tragic crime. Kenny insists that Kevin's murder wasn't the result of a personal vendetta or building tensions. As he sees it, it was a stupid, thoughtless decision made by two drugged-out teenagers who had lost touch with reality. But that's a different account from what Charles told me. When I interviewed Charles, he made a serious allegation that Kevin was a possible sexual predator. He claimed that Kevin had made unwanted sexual advances toward him, possibly in exchange for money. He also claimed to have spotted warning signs that Kevin was about to target his nephew too. Because of this, Charles claimed that his motive to kill Kevin wasn't purely financial. It was also to protect the children he felt he had a responsibility to. At the time, however, Charles didn't tell Kenny his true reason for wanting Kevin out of the picture. He was struggling to accept his status as a bisexual man and was afraid of that secret being let out, even to Kenny, his closest friend. In fact, to this day, Charles has never revealed the full story to Kenny, even though he's had plenty of opportunity to do so while in prison. Up until now, Kenny has only been told half the story of why they killed Kevin and why he's spending his life in jail. I wanted to present Kenny with this new information and gauge his reaction.
Well, so Charles has a little bit different version, and he said that you didn't know about it till way later. that him and Kevin kind of had like some kind of sexual thing going on.
Yeah, I didn't know about that at all.
At all? Or you didn't know then?
This is the first I've heard about it.
So let me kind of catch you up. So he said that he convinced you that it was just about a robbery and stuff like that. But in reality, he had done some kind of sexual stuff with him. And then on top of that, he was under the impression that Kevin also tried to maybe do something sexual with a child, because there was some kind of kid, I don't know if it was his sister's kid or whatever, said that Kevin had flashed money at him, and he was thinking that maybe he tried to bribe the kid with money for, sexual stuff. And then also the place, well, yeah, and I'm just trying to fill you in on what he's saying. And then also the place that you guys, murdered Kevin, that was a place that they had gone out and done sexual stuff before, and he was luring Kevin out there to do sexual stuff, but didn't tell you that end of it. That's the story that Charles gave me. And that this is the first time you're hearing that? What are you thinking when I tell you that? Do you think it's bullshit? I catch you off guard?
I don't. Yeah, a little bit. But listen, we don't really talk about that case or, what happened. I've been around Steve a lot, but we don't really discuss that situation, how we got to it, what was going on between him and Kevin. I don't know anything about that.
Whenever I interviewed him, this is where he told me, he said, I told Kenny I was doing one thing, and then I went and told Kevin that I wanted to do more sexual stuff out there, and that's how he lured Kevin out there. That's what he told me. That seemed to surprise you when I told you that, though.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, it actually makes me regret being a part of this. I mean, to me, that's an incendiary thing to the victim's family. It's such an unnecessary thing to even say, even if it's the truth.
Do you think it's not true?
And that's something I'm so extremely careful about. Victims' rights are extremely important.
Sure.
I've done a lot of work with victims groups. I've written an amends letter to my victim's family. And to characterize him in that way, I mean, I don't like the idea of putting him in any kind of negative light. Not that he was the saint, or the world's most perfect person. But
well, even if it's the truth, though?
I don't know. I mean, I'm big on the truth, too. So if that's what happened to him, then how could he say anything different than that? But I mean, this is 31 years ago. You would think that he would have said something to me.
I could have sworn he said that you didn't know at the time, but he's told you later on in prison about kind of what happened. Or the circumstances, but yeah. I mean, so that's, what he told me. And he said that you didn't know about it at the time, but here's something else that Charles said is he feels really, really bad because he feels like he's responsible for, convincing you to do what you did. Obviously you're your own person, and I think that you take responsibility for what you did. But he says that he feels really bad because he kind of talked you into this and all that. Is that accurate?
That's true to a degree. I mean, I wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been for him, but I don't think he would have done it if it hadn't been for me, and either one of us could have made the thing happen.
Kenny is totally taken off guard when I reveal what Charles told me. He insists he knew nothing about any sexual abuse and had no concerns about Kevin's behavior around his nephew. Despite spending years in prison alongside Charles, it's clear that they've rarely discussed the crime in depth. It takes Kenny a moment to process the bombshell revelation that his close friend has kept hidden for so long. This new information also stirs up feelings of regret in Kenny. He expresses concern for the victim's family and stresses the importance of respecting the victim's dignity when speaking publicly about the case. Even if what Charles says is true, it's an inflammatory detail that Kenny thinks might be best left unsaid. With the new revelation out of the way, I shift the focus to the events leading up to the murder, and Kenny talks me through the plot to kill Kevin.
So obviously, y'all basically want money from Kevin, want to rob him. Why murder? Why can't you just rob him?
Because he knew us, and we were afraid that he would just go tell on us. And it sounds so stupid now to think about it that way. It all came about one night. We're just sitting around high, we're coming down off acid, trying to think of ways to get money because we're strung out on dope, and we're just talking about all this crap, things that we would probably never do. In my mind, we'd never done anything like that before. We'd stolen some clothes from shopping malls. I even stole a gun from this guy's house because he had showed me where it is and traded it for dope. But
Sure.
we weren't in that life for real.
Yeah.
So we were talking about things like watching someone go to the ATM with binoculars and get their pen and snatch the card and try to get money that way, or snatch a purse. And then we somehow got up on the idea of the fact that Kevin had money because his nephew said that he'd seen him with a whole big wad of money in his glove box.
And maybe that's the
Why
kid.
not just go pry open the glove box, steal the money,
Yeah.
right?
And,
Because in our mind, he would have known that it was us. We were afraid to get in trouble.
and maybe that's what your co-defendant was referencing is the nephew, I guess, saw the money and he's saying that he believed that Kevin had, tried to convince him to do sexual stuff with him or something like that with the money.
I don't know anything about that. I've
Sure.
never gotten that. I don't know anything about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, it's surprising.
Is it?
I never saw anything.
Yeah, he said that he'd had a couple of experiences with Kevin, and then, like I said, he thought maybe that he'd tried something on the kid. And on top of that, he said he did want the money too. It was over money, but also it kind of, for him, it was that too. So who's the one that basically said, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to sit out here. I'm going to do this. Or did y'all just kind of plan it together?
Yeah, it all came out that night. I mean, we were sitting around, talking about things, and we're even taking little notes, writing things down like a bullet list, right? What we could do. And I think on that paper it says Steph's brother ? Or something like that. It's part of our discovery file. But we come up with this plan about one of us being in the woods and somebody else bringing him down and us doing it there, right?
Under the pretense that y'all are going to go get somebody stuck, a Jeep was stuck, and you're going to go get it out of the mud.
That's right. That was the word.
Yeah.
So this all happened, I think it was a Saturday night, and we were just crazy high, and a few days go by, and I don't really think anything more of it. And then the next Thursday, I was running around with another friend of mine, and we drove past the place where we had talked about doing the little turnoff by the woods in our neighborhood, behind the little neighborhood park. And Steve's car was there. There was no reason for it to be there. It immediately made my heart start pounding, like, oh my God, what's going on here?
But you weren't waiting out there. You just drove by the location that this later happened.
Exactly. I'd been playing a board game with this other friend of mine, a Star Trek game. Down that road, going back to his house and see the car there, and I immediately connected to what we had talked about the previous Saturday. Because there's no other reason for his car to be there, particularly not at night.
So what was his car doing there?
I didn't find out until the next day. I got a hold of Steve and told me that he had lured Kevin down there, that he had the gun down there and he just couldn't do it. And that if he needed help, he couldn't do it without me.
So he tells you that he was going to do it that night and he couldn't do it, basically?
Right.
How did you feel about that? Did it start to become a reality when he's telling you that he actually went down there with a gun and stuff?
Of course. Yeah, and he's asking me to help him. And I tried to say no a few times. I tried to wiggle out of it, tried to make it disappear, didn't want to do it. But eventually I just said yes. It was kind of like a joint. I don't want to smoke. I don't want to smoke. Give me that joint.
Yeah.
It was the same. I don't want to. All right, let's go.
And
I think for me, I just, there's a lot of things that go into it. Yes, I was strung out on drugs. Drugs are expensive, like we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like everything in my life was falling apart, and I didn't have much left. And this was one of my only friends, one of my closest. Been there my whole life, And I was watching Tombstone the other day, and I had that thing come on where somebody asked Doc Holliday, like, why you put yourself out there for Wyatt Earp all the time? And Doc Holliday says, Wyatt Earp is my friend. And the guy says, well, I got lots of friends. Doc Holliday says, well, I don't.
Mm.
And that resonates with me so much. It gave me chills when I was watching the movie, because that's why.
Yeah.
And I know that doesn't make sense.
Sure.
And I've thought about that a lot. And I think if I could rationalize it, if I could make what I did make sense, then I probably deserve to be here. Because if I think it makes sense to go down in the woods and shoot another human being, I deserve to be here. But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. But it happened, and it happened for a reason. And those were the reasons that made sense to me at that time when I was 18. And my life was just being destroyed by the things that I was involved in.
So y'all talked about the planning of it, the actual murder, but what about after? Did y'all talk about what you do after the murder?
No.
And that shows right there the immaturity and the not thinking right with it because of the drugs and things like that. Because that's pretty important, is afterwards you need to be able to, cover it up or do something that's not going to get you caught up, which is nearly impossible because, you're connected to the guy. So there was no discussion about, after we do this, we need to bury him, we need to run here, nothing like that?
No, I don't remember talking about anything like that. It's just like we're in the moment and it's happening. It's like we're reacting.
Yeah.
It was almost like being under a strobe light where everything is jerky and it's like stitched together with frames that don't really fit together.
Right.
That's how that whole situation was. Leading up to it and during and after was exactly like that.
As the summer wore on, a plan to kill Kevin took shape. At first, Kenny tells me it was just a far-off idea that Charles talked about one night when they were getting high. At the time, this was just a wild suggestion in a series of schemes they devised that night. Schemes that Kenny insists they never seriously intended on actually carrying out. To Kenny, these were just two immature kids acting tough and winding each other up. However, over the days that passed, this wild idea became a terrifying reality. When I talked to Charles, I learned that he'd made a failed attempt to execute Kevin's murder without Kenny. He brought Kevin down to the woods, where he'd stashed a gun. However, Charles abandoned the attempt when he was unable to locate the gun. Kenny nearly witnessed this when he saw Charles's car parked near the site, at which point it hit him that Charles was serious about Kevin's murder. Although he tried to back out, Kenny eventually caved to the pressure of loyalty to his closest friend. Kenny compares his relationship to Charles to that of Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp from the '93 movie Tombstone. Like Doc, Kenny felt a strong sense of loyalty to Charles and wanted to appease the wishes of his close, longtime friend. At the time, Kenny was homeless, with no prospects or future, and heavily dependent on Charles, who was one of the few people left in his life. Because of this, Kenny was easily persuaded to go along with the plan to murder Kevin, a plan that was never his to begin with.
So after you saw your co-defendant's car down there, how many days after that did the murder occur?
It was the next day.
The next day. Okay. So the day that this happened, y'all meet up somewhere?
We did, but I don't remember exactly where, if I went to his house or what.
Y'all talked about it one last time, I guess, that day?
As far as like the planning of it, I think that we walked down into the woods together, and he's like, I'm going to go get him.
Oh, wow. So y'all went out there where you were going to hide and kind of talked about, okay, you're going to do this and I'm going to do that and all this?
Mm-hmm. And I think like Steve was we were both supposed to be involved. He had a knife, and I had the gun. And so Steve went up to get him.
What time of day did this occur?
Probably early afternoon.
And it was a shotgun, right?
Yes, I had a shotgun that belonged to Steve's dad, actually.
Wow. Whenever he left you out there and you're waiting, probably like silent in the woods, just by yourself, and within literally just a matter of time, your life is going to change forever. What are you thinking right there? Are you thinking it's not really going to happen or what?
Thoughts were racing through my head so fast, and it was a hot day. It was July the 2nd, 1993. It was boiling hot. And I remember sweat being in my face and in my eyes, just stinging my eyes, but my body is literally shaking. It was trembling apart. And I was scared and I was hoping that it wasn't happening. I couldn't believe that I was in that situation. I'm shaking now.
Yeah.
Just thinking of it. And he's gone for so long, and I moved to a different spot of the weeds, where the weeds were taller or something. And so he's gone so long, and I'm thinking maybe it won't happen. Maybe it won't happen. Maybe he won't be there. Something, hopefully something will change, right?
Yeah. So you're waiting out there and you actually waited long enough to where you think maybe he's not coming. You move spots, which actually, your co-defendant even said that when he got out there, you weren't exactly where he thought you were going to be. So are you in a spot where you can actually see them walking towards you?
Yeah. I was in a spot that was down at the bottom of a hill, down by a little creek. And there's a path at the top of the hill that he had to walk through to go get him. And so when Steve came back after what seemed like forever, he came back by himself. And he started down the hill, and I remember feeling so relieved at that point. Almost like I hadn't been breathing for 15 minutes, and then I took a breath, and then 15 feet behind him, here comes this guy, right, just walking right behind him.
And then your heart
And
probably
from that
dropped.
moment, things are just like almost autopilot. It's like I just kind of shouldered the gun and shot him. And he dropped immediately.
How far were you from him whenever you decided to come out and shoot?
Oh, I'm not sure how exactly, maybe 40 feet.
Where was Charles?
In front of Kevin, and a little bit to the left.
He wasn't in the, because, a shotgun has a spread on it, probably bigger than someone's head. So you weren't going to accidentally shoot him.
Probably why he was putting so much distance between him and the guy.
Yeah. How did that feel, raising that gun up and doing that?
Sick. I mean, just can't really.
Yeah, because you're not your history doesn't show violence,
No, I'm not a violent person. I don't like violence. I don't like hurting people. I don't like hurting animals, any of that.
That's pretty, it's crazy that, because, your history doesn't show violence, but yet you're, killing somebody in the woods and it's all planned out. That's just really, it's deep, It's scary that the drugs can do that kind of stuff. And whenever you shot, you say he immediately fell?
Yes.
What was your co-defendant's reaction whenever you did that?
I don't really remember looking at him at that exact moment. I know that I walked up to Kevin where he was, and he was laying on the ground, and his eyes were rolled back in his head. He had the red spots from where he'd been shot on different parts of his face and back. And
was he still moving?
Motion to Steve. I remember motioning to Steve. I'm like, I held up my hands like, what? Like he got a knife and tied it in his pockets, and he did the motion back to me like, I don't know. And I knew that I couldn't leave him like that. And so I shot him again, put the gun right next to him and shot him again. And I've never seen anything that horrible before, and I will never be able to not see what that looks like.
Yeah, because that close with a shotgun is just, it probably, I'm assuming he had a closed casket.
Yeah. It was a horrible, horrible thing.
Yeah. Do you have dreams, nightmares about it?
I don't really have dreams about it.
I mean, I could tell like 30-something years later, you're extremely uncomfortable. You're just, kind of going through it again.
It's a terrible thing. And I'm looking at it right now, and it's a terrible thing. All these years later, I cannot believe that I put myself in this situation. I allowed this to happen.
Kenny is audibly distressed when he talks about Kevin's murder. It's clear that his decision to pull the pistol trigger still haunts him all these years later. And what torments Kenny most is the senselessness of why he did it. At just 18 years old, Kenny didn't have a violent bone in his body, yet he took a man's life in the most brutal way imaginable. That summer afternoon was oppressively hot. As Kenny waited for Charles, sweat stung his eyes and minutes ticked by. The plan didn't quite feel real, and Kenny kept hoping it would somehow fall apart. But a sickening feeling rose up inside him. Through the trees, he saw Charles walking towards him, and just a few feet behind, Kevin, their victim. In the next few moments, Kenny says his body acted on autopilot. Mechanically, he pulled the shotgun up to his shoulder, pulled the trigger, and Kevin fell with a thump to the ground. But the deed wasn't yet over. Kevin was still hanging on to life. Shaking, Kenny walked up to Kevin and delivered a second, fatal shot at point-blank range. He was flooded with instant regret. The graphic crime scene would leave a horrific imprint on his memory for years to come. Even today, Kenny seems unable to believe how he wound up in this terrible situation.
And you said you've actually written letters to the victim's family?
Have.
I didn't think they allowed that, or is that through a certain program?
It's through the Victim Services Coordinator in Central Office.
Did you get a response from them?
No, not directly, but years later, I had written my story down in a book that was published with some other guys that I had done time with. It was 5 young people who had committed murders telling their stories. Book.
What's the name of the book?
It was self, and it's called Lost Innocence, Understanding Youth to Kill. In fact, the first part of the story that I sent you was the original text of that, slightly edited, updated a little bit. But the victim's niece in this case, Kelly, she was aware of the book being published and wanted to get a copy of it. So she wrote me. And when I saw her name on the outside of the envelope, my heart started pounding, and opened it up, and it's this short letter. It says, "You may not remember who I am, but how could you ever forget?"
Right.
Something like that. But, and she was very honest about some of what she felt. And basically, I was the monster under her bed her whole adult life. The reason for her anxiety and her lack of trust, fearing people. It's like I feared people because of what my grandpa did to me.
Right.
I was the reason she was scared. I was the reason that she had anxiety, didn't sleep well, and woke up cold sweating. So she explained some of these things to me, and she asked for a copy of my story, and I sent it to her. But that's the response. It wasn't really a response to the letter that I had written. That letter, when you write a letter to a victim's family, you send it to the Victim Services Coordinator, and they look at it to make sure that the language is appropriate.
Sure.
And then they contact the family. You never contact
them. Right.
And then they can say whether they want the letter or not. And the family did accept the letter.
What was that like, writing that letter?
It took a long time to write. 8 years, actually. And I think I wrote it maybe 8 years after I'd been in prison. But I went through a lot of versions of it in my head, and I thought about it for a long time. And when I put pen to paper, I could write like a sentence or two, and I set it aside for a week.
Years into his prison sentence, Kenny has struck up a correspondence with the victim's niece. Kenny tells me it's been a difficult but therapeutic experience for both of them. Exchanging these letters has forced Kenny to confront the ripple effect of his actions back in '93 and gave him a major revelation he needed to turn his life around. As he learned, he had become the monster under this young girl's bed, the source of her anxiety and the sleepless nights that had shaped her entire adulthood. That's given him a sobering glimpse into the impact of his crime, and perhaps that's why he talks about his crime with so much regret in our conversation. Winding back 30 years, I wondered what Kenny's state of mind was like immediately after the murder.
After you shot him the second time, was there any discussion before y'all drug him out? Did y'all talk to each other about it, or was it just reaction? Like, hey, let's drag him here. Let's get out of here.
I think it was just reaction. I mean, I don't know. I don't recall anything like that. We drug him over to the creek. We emptied his pockets. We got his keys from back to his house. Tried to make it look like he had left. So we left all kinds of his stuff at the house. left his dog at the house, just took off, went out of town.
Did y'all immediately leave town after you took all the stuff?
I think we went and got some dope first.
Yeah. Were y'all just snorting the coke, or were y'all smoking crack or shooting it?
We were just snorting the coke. I mean, every now and then we would throw some in a joint or on top of a beer can and smoke it a little bit, but mostly we're just snorting coke and meth.
Did you and Charles ever, like talk about that, like the event afterwards, like leaving and running stuff? Like, did y'all go over the things again and like talk about it?
No, I don't remember having any kind of discussion about it. It's not like it was a secret, I mean, it's like between us, but we didn't really, what was there to talk about it? It happened.
Yeah. After y'all got the dope, where'd y'all go?
We went down to Conspired Lake with Steve's mom.
What's that like, hanging around with the people that don't know it, like his mother? She doesn't know what happened, and y'all just murdered somebody. How are y'all keeping it together?
Staying high.
Yeah.
That night, I mean, I couldn't hardly keep it together. I couldn't fit my mind around the fact that I just killed. I could not accept it. I just remember laying there, just thinking. I went out into the middle of the lake in the middle of the night and swam out there. And I was going to kill myself. I didn't want to be alive anymore. I didn't want to feel what I felt before. And I was literally going to drown myself, and I put my hands up over my head and let myself sink. And my feet touched the bottom, panicked, scared, pushed off, came back to shore.
In the hours after the murder, Charles and Kenny scrambled to cover their tracks. Unable to process the enormity of their actions and acting purely on impulse, they dumped Kevin's body in a nearby creek, rummaged through his belongings, and fled the scene. Kenny tells me that their actions were disorganized and impulsive, an indication of just how little thought they'd put into their plan. As luck would have it, that weekend was the 4th of July. Hoping to avoid suspicion, the two boys stuck to their weekend plans of attending a family getaway at a nearby lake. That night, they numbed themselves with drugs and pretended that nothing had happened. Kenny, though, was unraveling. As he lay awake that night, Kenny couldn't shake the images of the gruesome crime scene. Under the crushing guilt of having just taken an innocent man's life, Kenny left his bed and waded out into the middle of the lake, intending to end his own life. Yet as he submerged, panic took over, and he resurfaced, gasping for air. That night, Kenny returned to the shore, choosing out of guilt or survival to confront whatever grim future was to come. On the next episode of Voices of a Killer, we hear how 18-year-old Kenny faced the unforgiving letter of the law. If you want to find out what happens next, right now, you can sign up at patreon.com/voicesofakiller. There you can find bonus content, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community. So go to patreon.com/voicesofakiller to sign up now. Your support is what keeps us passionate about bringing these stories to you. That's a wrap on this episode of Voices of a Killer. A big shout out to Sonic Futures, who handled the production, audio editing, music licensing, and promotion of this podcast. If you want to hear more episodes like this one, make sure to visit our website at voicesofakiller.com. There you can find previous episodes, transcripts, and additional information about the podcast. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach new listeners. Thank you for your support, and we can't wait to share more stories with you in the future. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Toby, and we'll see you next time on Voices of a Killer.